a little bit of WebbyCat. So for the Q&A, we kindly ask you to put your questions in the chat, and we will address them then in our moderation to the speakers. Also, please note that this event is being recorded, so you're welcome to switch off your video if you don't want to be on the screen. And also, after the webinar, you will receive a short evaluation form where you can leave comments and also help us to improve further events. So, what to expect of today? First, we will start with a short introduction and a Mentimeter poll, because despite our webinar, we would really like to know who's with us today, where you're from. So there will be a couple of questions, and so we get a better idea who's with us today. Then we will set the stage by talking about sustainability and climate action in higher education, and really see, okay, how is this topic rooted and what does it have to do with academic travel and sustainability. Then we're very happy to welcome our speaker, Marléne from the European Commission, who will give us insights on the Marie Curie's Skłodowska Green Charter, and Katinka from the University of Oslo will continue on our experiences we had with the expert working group, in which both Katinka and I were involved in establishing and designing this Green Charter. Marit Eldholm from the University of Oslo will provide then a short overview of, from a practitioner's point of view, a user perspective, since she manages a big research program connected to the MSCA program. And in the end, of course, we will have a lot of time for discussion and questions. So first, the Mentimeter poll. So soon in the chat, you will find the link to mentimeter.com and a code. We would like to ask you to open a new browser tab to join us there, and you will see the first question. And we would like to ask you in which country you are based. Okay, and the first answers are popping in. So we have Germany, Norway, Kenya, Belgium, Estonia, Finland, Croatia, Romania, Greece, the Czech Republic, Luxembourg, and Italy, Scotland, Iceland, Sweden. Oh, we're a very international crowd today, so that's makes us very happy. Did I find Serbia is also with us, and I think, oh, Slovenia I haven't mentioned yet. So excellent, thank you for sharing that. It gives us a good idea. So for next, we would like to know, what is your position? You can choose between sustainability manager, mobility and transport manager, research support manager, researcher, or maybe you're also a participant of the MSCA program, or something else entirely. And this column is growing fast, so that's our mystery crowd here right now, because Mentimeter did not allow us to have individual responses in this one. But yeah, so we have 4 sustainability managers with us, 4 who are explicitly working on mobility and transport, so that's exciting. 8 research support managers, which or who might be like the experts on the MSCA program, 3 researchers, and then 17 others. And if you want to, because I'm kind of curious right now. Just write us what the other is in the chat so that we get a glimpse on that. So thank you for answering that. And that brings us to our last question, which we will pick up in the discussion at the end. What measures or requirements from third-party funders would be helpful to support sustainable travel? So what are your thoughts on that? What would you like to see in the future? Maybe not just only from the MSCA program, but also from other programs that you're working with at your university. So that seems to take some time before, now the first answer appears. Okay. Okay, we have a lot of funding issues, of course, funding for slow travel, or also allow extra funding if choosing, for example, the train, discounts, and alternative for planes. And yeah, someone also mentions information material, which I think is crucial also in the field of awareness raising. Night trains are a big issue within the European Union, also to connect the different train systems across countries. Yeah, also to bring conferences and workshops closer to home, which is, I think, a topic that we discussed frequently at our universities or in the international field since the corona pandemic, since traveling is really also a little bit harder. Yeah, and other incentives are mentioned here, despite the financial ones. Yeah, and someone also wrote defining what is sustainable travel. So I think we will go into that a little bit more in our presentations. And so I would say thank you to all of you who answered here. Keep on answering because we will go back to that slide later on. And now it is my turn to share my screen. And of course, my presentation is gone. Okay, excellent. Just bear with me for 1 second. It was supposed to happen. Here we go. So, okay. So, as mentioned earlier on, I would like to give a short introduction to sustainability and climate action in higher education and why we as university administrators are really looking into this field. And of course, UNICA Green and SDGs working group is really dedicated to that. So there are a lot of sustainability professionals working in that field who are familiar with this topic, but since we're joined by so many other people today, we thought, okay, it might be a good idea to just go back to that topic. And first, I would like to share this quote with you from Drew Gilpin-Faust, the former president of Harvard University. And she said, sustainability is a problem in which the discovery and dissemination of knowledge will play a critical role. It is a problem that must be faced in ways that universities are uniquely suited to model. So why is that? Why universities? We wrote in our teaser for this webinar that more and more universities are actually engaged in climate action, and many of them adopt a whole institution approach, because sustainability can be seen as an overarching topic which affects like all the 3 pillars of our university, life, and those are, of course, research, teaching, management, and campus. And if we are looking at the research pillar, we really see that, of course, our researchers contribute to finding solutions to global future questions, be it in regarding the climate crisis, biodiversity, or limited natural resources, but also social inequalities, which are as well addressed within the SDGs. Within the teaching pillar, universities really have the potential to integrate sustainability in their overall curricula, meaning that not only students who have a designated program on sustainability are getting in touch with the issue, but that every student can learn about sustainability. And so this will help to empower students to gain the required knowledge and skills for shaping sustainable development. In terms of our institutional responsibility, so looking at the management side and also on campus, of course, universities have huge opportunities to get active. And fields are, for example, to reduce the environmental impact in buildings, to invest in green IT, but also to work on energy efficiency management systems, so they're dedicated environmental management systems. But we can also look at our procurement. So what do we buy? What kind of standards are behind that? And how can we increase not only efficiency, but also sufficiency in our use? But also, I mentioned the social component earlier on. We can consider sustainability also in our human resources, in our community engagement, and last but not least, in our green business travel, so which is the topic of today's webinar. So all in all, when talking about sustainability at universities, we are really looking at strengthening inter- and transdisciplinary approaches, and we can regard a university as learning communities for sustainability. So while doing this, or this whole idea behind this is, at least also for us at Freie Universität, is to regard sustainability as a holistic approach and to be in constant dialogue with the university community, but also to reach out publicly to inform about our projects. And we also need to consider that sustainability is a continuous improvement process. It's not a state that you can somehow achieve, but it needs continuous work. And that's why exchange also in the international field, like with this webinar, are so important. So in the past years, more and more climate emergency declarations and climate action plans were formulated in higher education. And a lot of universities are setting very ambitious goals in that field. And I just selected one example. It's not representative, but it's the Race to Zero for universities and colleges, which was or is connected to the COP. And you can see that by now already over 1,000 institutions are involved in that scheme, declaring openly their climate commitments and also following up in reporting about this. To give you a more concrete example, I would like to quickly go to the Freie Universität Berlin, where I work. We, for example, declared a state of climate emergency back in December 2019. And here our executive board passed a resolution acknowledging the university's responsibility for climate protection and formulating 7 far-reaching goals that focus on the whole university. So again, here we have this whole institutional approach picked up. And one of the main goals is a very ambitious one for our university, to become climate neutral by 2025. And I've listed a couple of strategic options that we have identified to achieve that goal, or at least work on that. And without going into numbers right now, I'm happy to follow up on that in individual questions also after this webinar. But we want to reduce our energy efficiency or improve our energy efficiency again by another 10%. We already achieved 80% improvement here, and increase the use of renewable energy. We are working on internal offset projects, and I mentioned that we believe in communication with the whole university community. So we also have a participatory approach, which is managed through an ideas and innovation management system, where staff and students can participate in our by bringing in their own creative climate protection ideas and receive funding for that. You see that in the middle, we have written sustainable mobility, and with the focus especially on business trips. And here is our goal to define a reduction goal for flight emissions, to establish a sustainability compliant business travel policy, to extend virtual communication, and especially also in the field of conferences, and to create an internal climate fund for promoting new projects. So why is this role of academic travel so significant when talking about climate goals? Here again, I would like to share a couple of numbers from our university. And you can see here the CO2 emissions in tons from 2018-2019, based on the average of energy consumptions in those years. And so without going into detail, I would like to draw your attention to the last part here, where you can see that business travel, and here we consider flights only, and also only the travel of our researchers and staff. So student mobility is not included in that scheme. If we look at this, it makes up 1/3 of our emissions today. So focusing on business travel reduction, and also to have a sustainable business travel policy, is one of the key elements for us to improve our climate neutrality strategy. Last but not least, I would like to give a short introduction on the role of third-party funding in that field. I think for all our universities, third-party funding plays a huge role in international research cooperation. So, and also a large proportion of travel is financed by these acquired funds, which are then also subject to the regulations of the third-party funders. Again, taking Freie Universität as an example, we can see that over 70% of business trips at Freie Universität were financed by third-party funds. So when we are working on our business travel policy, we can, of course, really focus on the regulations that we can issue for our budget-related travel. But when it comes to third-party funded travel, the regulations of those funders, of course, apply. And that's why for us, it is key that initiatives like the MSCA Green Charter are established by the funders themselves in order to pick up on our ideas for sustainable travel. And just to kick off the discussion at the end, I compiled a couple of potentials that I see that third-party funders have through their funding guidelines. And for me, it's crucial that on the one hand, of course, they create awareness of the applicant, university, or even the individual researcher applying when reading those funding instructions. They also can support the choice of sustainable travel options by offering financial support or other incentives. And of course, they also establish reporting guidelines, and with that, certain commitments on the side of the applicants. And by doing that, they also have kind of a role of a beacon, or that they can also support the internal policy development, because if data are constantly needed for reporting, it will also encourage universities to compile those data and follow up on that. So this is my very short introduction to the topic, and right now I'm very happy to welcome Marléne Bartés, who joined the European Commission back in 2013 and is now on the Marit Skłodowska-Curie unit since 2020, where she follows different files, including the greening of the program and its contribution to the European Green Deal. And Marléne, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm happy to be here and to see that there's interest in the topic and quite a high level of participation. So I'm sure I'll learn a lot from you as well. I've learned already a lot from your introduction, and the polls were also very interesting to see. I believe not too many people are involved yet in MSCA program management, at least from the poll. That's what appeared. So I'll briefly explain for those who don't know or are not familiar with the Marit Skłodowska-Curie actions. Later on, I'll briefly touch upon that. So just a caveat, before starting, I'm not, unfortunately, an environmental expert. This is why also we work with people who are more familiar in the field, and also for the development of the so-called MSCA Green Charter that I will introduce to you later on. Luckily, we have also relied on the support of people who are experienced in that field, and also thanks to Katrin and Katinka, who are here today with us. So just to set the frame, so on my first slide, this is a little bit the scene setter, or the background in which we at the European Commission are operating. And well, then there's this trickle down effect, obviously, to member states and institutions in member states and beyond. So just policy wise, I mean, when we talk about greening our practices, or greening education or research and innovation, we operate within these three policy initiatives. So the European Green Deal, which I assume you're all very familiar with, but which is basically our very ambitious new growth strategy to become climate neutral. So Europe to become the first climate neutral continent by 2050. And then we have, of course, specific targets to reach that. And one very important one is to reduce by 55% our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 compared to 1990 values. There are a lot of initiatives. I mean, if you follow the topic, you see that, you know, there's lots of new initiatives and strategies coming out. So, you know, biodiversity strategy, climate adaptation strategy, the zero pollution action plan, smart and sustainable transport strategy, etc. So it can be a bit overwhelming sometimes, you know, to see the amount of legislative initiatives prepared. But I think it's also very important, and especially if we look at the area of transport, obviously that's one, or clean transport is also one of the policy areas addressed by the Green Deal, because I think transport accounts for more or less 25% of greenhouse gas emissions in the EU, as opposed to energy, which I think is around 75%. So I'm happy, Katrin, that you mentioned also both energy and transport, because we should have a holistic view and approach, especially if you're representing an institution here rather than just an individual researcher. But yeah, so there are also concrete targets related to transport. So to reduce by 90%, I think, transport-related emissions by 2050, which is ambitious. And yeah, I mean, for this, we have published also a sustainable and smart mobility strategy. Then we have the two other policy initiatives, which bring us a little bit closer to, you know, the education and research dimensions of this greening transition. So the it's two actually Commission communications, which were published in September 2020 on achieving a European education area and a new European research area. And these actually specifically mention, you know, their contributions, or the contribution of the R&I sectors and the higher education sectors to what we call the green and digital transition, so the twin transition. And also with, you know, specific suggestions and yeah, concrete, rather concrete initiatives. So, you know, more investments, skills development, behavioral change. You know, the use of open science to, you know, spread knowledge, share experience, you know, transferring research results, or, you know, bringing them closer to the market or to policymakers, etc., etc. So this is a little the political, let's say, framework. On the next slide, you'll see a few concrete education initiatives which are ongoing, and you've probably heard of some of them. So we have, so the Commission has submitted, recently published a proposal for a council recommendation on education for environmental sustainability. So this is really to help schools, member states, higher education institutions, so including universities, but also NGOs, etc., in equipping students and pupils with the right skills on sustainability, climate change and environment. And linked to that, the GRC, so the Joint Research Center, which is also an EU body, has published also in January this year a so-called European Sustainability Competence Framework, Green Comp. If you click, I mean, I guess the slides will be shared after the event. You have the links here, so I would encourage you to also have a look, because it really maps the competences needed for a green transition, and also a working level definition of what we mean by, you know, sustainability, or education for environmental sustainability, because I think it varies a lot also from country to country or from institution to institution. We have the European Strategy for Universities, which you might have read already, heard about. It was also published in January this year. And here it's really to support universities or higher education institutions more largely to adapt and contribute to Europe's resilience and recovery. And there, of course, I mean, there are 4 specific objectives, and one of them is, you know, universities as key contributors to the green and digital transition. And there again, there's a number of suggestions, initiatives, such as the Horizon Europe missions, which I'll mention briefly, the competence framework that I've just presented, a green Erasmus Plus, or blue Erasmus Plus, as we call it as well. I saw in the poll, for instance, some of the replies were that, you know, more funding or additional days for slow travel would be welcomed. So this is actually something that has been implemented in Erasmus Plus, if I'm not mistaken. So there is additional funding for, you know, low carbon forms of transportation, and there's also additional travel days for mobilities that, you know, will use the train, bus, or carpooling instead of taking the plane. So I think some of these aspects are already addressed. There will also be micro-credentials, the Green Charter that I'm going to present, and monitoring of this, you know, Green Charter are also some of the initiatives suggested by the European Strategy for Universities. So if you haven't read it yet, I would encourage you to have a look. And then very briefly, just two other initiatives that we have. So the so-called Education for Climate Coalition, which is a participatory community for students, teachers, any education stakeholders to act collectively. So you can become part of this community. There's a lot of participatory challenges. It's also used to upscale, successful and concrete actions. So, don't hesitate to have a look and participate. And actually, this Education for Climate Coalition is also closely linked to the European Climate Pact, which here again is basically a platform where you can make pledges, you can become climate ambassadors, etc., etc. So these are a few of the initiatives going on, in the education side of things at EU level. On the next slide, you'll see, the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, we are part of the broader framework program Horizon Europe. So you know probably Erasmus Plus quite well. So Horizon Europe more for the research and innovation funding at EU level. It's quite a big budget for 7 years. We're talking here of 7 years. So 95.5 billion euros. And actually 35% of this funding should be to help meet the EU's climate objectives or climate targets. So actually quite a big proportion of the projects and the initiatives that will be funded via Horizon Europe should address the Green Deal, which is, I think, a quite positive development. So I'm more focusing then on the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, but other parts of Horizon Europe, in particular, if you look here in the middle, Pillar 2, also addresses global challenges, and you can see that, food, bioeconomy, natural resources, environment, etc., are there in the so-called clusters. We also have what we call the Horizon or the EU missions, I think they're called now. I'm not sure if you've heard about them, but these are also quite ambitious missions, as the name says, that will be funded mostly by Horizon Europe, but not only. So that's 5 big missions which are supposed to address, global challenges. So there's one that is adaptation to climate change, where we want to set up 150 climate resilient regions and communities. There's one on restoring our oceans and waters by 2030, 100 climate neutral cities, and I think there also transport plays a big role, a soil deal for Europe, so how to create living labs to get healthy soils. And then there's also one on cancer, because this has also been identified as one of this century's big challenges. And so these Horizon EU missions are, as I said, mostly funded by Horizon Europe, but they're actually a portfolio of actions. So they go beyond only Horizon Europe and only research and innovation. So there will be, research projects, but there will also be policy measures, legislative initiatives, funding from other EU programs such as LIFE, Erasmus Plus, the Connecting Europe facility, etc., etc. So this, if you haven't, heard about them before, maybe this is something that you want to have a look at as well. On the next slide, so the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, which is one of the parts under Horizon Europe, for 6.6 billion euros over the 7 years of the framework program. We are often called mobility program, a little bit like Erasmus Plus or Erasmus for researchers, which is true to a certain extent, but not only. So we are, let's say, a mobility and training program for researchers at all levels of their careers, so from PhD candidates to more experienced researchers. But we also support collaboration between institutions, to set up doctoral or postdoctoral programs. So I think it's important to think, yes, okay, there's a mobility of individuals, but actually there's also a real structuring impact and effect on the institutions that decide to collaborate to set up, for example, a joint doctoral program, which is not an easy task. So obviously there is a lot of traveling involved in the MSCA, and this is something that we don't want to put into question. So for us, it is important that individual researchers cross borders physically, that they meet with their peers around the world. So we don't fund only projects that cover only Europe. And I was happy to see that, for example, we have Kenya represented here. So we also go beyond Europe. We usually cross disciplines. So, exchanges should be across different disciplines and also sectors. So we target both the academic, but also the non-academic sectors, for example, small and medium enterprises. And we have a very high participation actually of the private sector in our projects. So we have 5 actions, but actually for you here today, I would say maybe 4 are important. The doctoral networks, which are really setting up doctoral programs amongst the consortium of organizations. Then we have the postdoctoral fellowships. So there's usually one experienced researcher finding a host in Europe and then carrying out his postdoc research. And there's also an outgoing so-called global fellowship. So where the fellow actually will spend 2 years outside of Europe in a third country and then come back to Europe to finalize his postdoc. And then staff exchanges, and I think staff exchanges is important in today's discussion on greening transport. So staff exchanges is also a consortium of institutions in Europe and beyond. So actually here we have a lot of third countries participating from anywhere in the world, and they exchange their staff for up to 12 months. So they collaborate on a research and innovation project, either a new one or already existing one, if the partners already know each other, and they can just send their staff. So the staff remains employed at the sending institution, but just goes abroad for a number of months. And here, obviously, I think travel-related emissions are quite high because it is very international. The focus is on cross-border mobility, be it with Kenya, Japan, Canada, etc. So obviously there is also an impact on emissions related to these activities. So we have done a number of things that we'll see on the next slide to try and green the MSCA. And I also, like Katrin, you mentioned earlier on that there's 2 levels of participation, especially through research. So there's a content, contributing, through developing new breakthrough solutions or monitoring, producing data, etc. So that's really research being used to help fight climate change through content of projects. And then there's a whole more implementation side, administrative side, or more at organization level. So we're trying to look at both. So we've done an MSCA portfolio analysis, really looking at the topics on the content of research projects that we fund that have a relevance for the Green Deal. And I think we've identified over 500 of them. So I think it's also important to say that the MSCA is bottom up. So bottom up means that it's actually the projects that decide what they want to collaborate on, or what research they want to carry out. It's not us at the European Commission deciding that it should be social sciences or chemistry or etc. So it's really the projects coming up with a topic. So I think the high number of projects in Green Deal related areas not being imposed by us, but being proposed from the ground, shows that there's a real appetite and real interest from stakeholders on the ground. So we're mapping this, and it will be published also online, Green Deal and mission related. So there will be, the Horizon Europe dashboard, where you'll have nice statistics of successful projects, etc., etc. We're also organizing events to bring together, all these different projects to exchange. We will be publishing green success stories, so trying to, highlight some of the MSCA projects that have good or implement or managed successfully to reduce the environmental impact of their research activities. Also our events like the European Researchers Night, which you might be familiar with. It's an event that happens in September each year. It's a huge event with millions of participants in different, all across the EU and Horizon Europe associated countries. So those countries that are part of the program, and it's basically citizens outreach. So it's events organized together with museums, research institutes, etc., to reach out to the public, especially a young public, and bring research closer to them. And then more concretely, we have the Green Charter. So the MSCA Green Charter and related guidance material, and linked to that we have environmental reporting, which I think is also important, and Katrin mentioned earlier before. So if we go to the MSCA Green Charter on the next slide, it has been published quite recently. So it is part of the, it is mentioned, let's say, in the Horizon Europe work program. So the work program is really, let's say, the legal basis, or the Bible, as we want to call it, if you want to apply for funding. It's also binding. I mean, it mentions all the rules, etc., for submitting successful applications. So in this Horizon Europe work program, we specify that all MSCA funded projects are encouraged to address the principles of the MSCA Green Charter, to try and reduce the environmental impact of their activities. Now, I think what is important to note here is that it's encouraged, not obliged at this stage, because this is the first time that we introduce something like that. So let's say it's a soft approach. It's more linked at this stage also to awareness raising. So we hope that applicants or interested stakeholders, when they read the Horizon Europe program, just mentioning this Green Charter, which then mentions the Green Deal, etc., that this will actually raise awareness amongst those who have maybe not heard about it or not thought about greening their practices before. And then for those who are already quite advanced, like a number of the participants here today, I think it's also an encouragement or a sign of support from, as you said, third party funders, or some form a bit higher up, to say that that this is the right direction, and that we encourage these kind of initiatives. So the Green Charter, if you haven't had a look at it, it's a set of principles, let's say, that address the either individual researchers, organizations, or consortia. And then with the last part also on dissemination and exploitation. So the different levels, with very concrete actions on how to reduce the environmental impact of their activity. So it's not only travel related, it's much larger, and there's a number of items in there, such as minimizing the production of harmful substances, prioritizing low carbon forms of transportation, using teleconferencing tools, reducing the use of consumables or energy, or organizing sustainable project events, etc. As I said, it's not binding. It's not, we don't oblige people to implement these principles. We encourage them on a best effort basis. But what we will do is that at the end of the project, every single beneficiary will have to report at final report stage, will have to say what they have or have not done to follow the MSCA Green Charter. So even though we won't penalize financially projects that haven't done anything, they will have to explain why they haven't done anything. So here again, it joins a little bit this idea of, raising awareness, and maybe, making people more sensible to the question of greening. This is the first stage. It's a soft approach. It might be that if we see that there's nothing really happening, and those who already do it, they continued, but the others still don't care, we might want to become or to impose more, which I think is open to discussion still. For example, by having green eligibility criteria. So really, when people apply, for now it's based on excellence, it's based on impact, it's based on implementation. This is how proposals are evaluated. But actually, it could be that at the second stage, we might introduce really green eligibility criteria for the selection of successful proposals. But this, I think, is also something that has to be discussed at higher level across the board. So for Horizon Europe more generally, and not necessarily only for our program part, which is the MSCA. Now, on the next slide, I just extracted as an example the travel-related principles from the Charter. So you see they do remain quite vague, let's say. So these are, suggested actions, but the means of implementing this are up to the individual researchers or institutions. So obviously, I guess one of the main suggestions is to use low carbon forms of transportation, including for commuting. So we're not only thinking about traveling, across borders by plane, but I think also, commuting has an impact, and their institutions can probably also support individuals to reach certain targets. To employ teleconferencing tools as a complement to physical attendance at events where such attendance is not strictly necessary nor advantageous. So this was a big debate also with the expert group that we used to develop this charter. I reassure you, I didn't come up with these principles on my own. So we did actually recruit people who know better. But as I said, the MSCA remains not a mobility program, but let's say the mobility component of projects remains one of the key principles of the program, just like it is for Erasmus+. And so we don't want to see a complete switch from physical attendance to online attendance. I think now with COVID, we have tools also for hybrid events, etc. And then, of course, it's up to the discretion of every individual to define whether traveling across borders for a 15-minute presentation at an event is really worth it, or if their, teleconferencing might not be a better approach. So we will not impose anything, very strict on that. And then you see the second part. So for institutions, of course, to make teleconferencing tools available to support individuals who want to use more sustainable and low carbon forms of transportation. Which includes, of course, project meetings and conferences, etc., etc. And I think here it's also important that, if you organize an event for the project, that you think about the location to make sure that it's easily accessible by all the project partners, maybe close to an airport, etc., etc. So I think here there's also, an impact of the choice. And then support carbon offsetting measures in cases where, emissions cannot be avoided. On the next slide, you just see a little bit what is the financial or the possible funding. So this is for doctoral networks, for instance. So you see on the left side, it's basically the contribution that goes to the recruited researcher. That will be part of the network. And on the right, we have the institutional, so the money that goes to the institutions in the consortium. So this is always per month and per person. So obviously costs related to travel for the activities of the researcher should be covered by the research training and networking contribution. So not to be mistaken, for example, with the mobility allowance, which we have on the left, which is for private related travel of the researcher. So of course, the researcher, if he wants to travel and see his family, would be encouraged to maybe use a train rather than a plane, if that's at all possible. But otherwise, we encourage the institutions to use the budget available to either offset or actually encourage their staff or the researcher to, travel sustainably. But we can discuss this later on. And then linked to the MSCA Green Charter, we have also published some guidance material, which you will see on the next slide. Also, maybe important for you to know, because we're talking MSCA Green Charter, so whatever is in there is not only for MSCA beneficiaries, obviously. I mean, it's called MSCA Green Charter because we produced it here in-house in the MSCA unit, but the principles in there are really, I think, addressing anyone in the, higher education and research and innovation community. So if you don't have an MSCA project, it doesn't mean that you cannot follow this charter. I think it's important to mention. And so we have compiled some guidance material, non-exhaustive, obviously. I mean, there's a lot out there, and you probably know better than I, but we've tried to, gather some, best practices to inspire other people who would like to maybe green their activities, but don't know really how. So I would encourage you to have a look here as well. Actually, on the next slide, you will see that there is a whole section on travel guidelines, so either from specific universities or from university alliances. Also about, offsetting, for example, here at KU Leuven and Belgium, etc., etc. And then we also have guidelines, so you will see on the next slide, more general. So, for example, how to organize sustainable events, how to pick more sustainable hotels. I mean, we're talking more travel today, but I guess travel also involves hotels. You have spoken, Katrin, also of procurement, more green procurement. So we have a handbook here, which is more addressed, to the public sector, the Commission specifically, but which can easily be transposed, I think, to others, etc., etc. So there is some guidance material which we update, or we try to update once in a while. So if you have suggestions for really good, documents that should be in there, please don't hesitate to share them with us. I mean, we're always happy to receive more input from the ground. And then my final slide, sorry, I think I'm way over time, but it's the last one. Just for you to know, kind of upcoming. So we have what we call the MSCA Presidency Conference. So as you know, the presidency of the Council, or the European Council, Council of the EU, sorry, rotates every 6 months. So it's currently the French holding the presidency of the Council of the EU. And so within their presidency agenda, they organize, like previous presidencies and following presidencies, MSCA Conference 1. And it's actually also, I think, the 25 years anniversary of the MSCA. So this will be happening, it's co-organized by the Ministry of Higher Education, Research and Innovation, but also the Université Paris Sciences et Lettres. So it will be taking place in Paris in May. It will be a hybrid event, and there will be one workshop specifically focusing on the MSCA Green Charter and how to implement them in research projects, also inviting speakers from projects to provide a little bit feedback on what they have done to green their practices. So it's open participation. Anyone is obviously welcome to join online, and so you have the link here if you would like to listen into the discussion. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we are also now in the process of compiling what we call MSCA Green success stories, which we will be publishing on our website. So just, beneficiaries providing testimonials on how they are dealing with, better transportation, greener travel, recycling some of the lab equipments, etc. So really hands-on experience sharing by beneficiaries, so that others who might be at a loss of where to start could get some inspiration. And I'll stop here. Happy to take any questions you might have, or either now or later on.
Thank you so much, Marléne, for your comprehensive presentation and for really providing us with the whole spectrum, also not just only about the discourse that you had in your teams and at the EU Commission, but really also, it really relates to what we're discussing on university level, also in our working groups concerned with mobility. Because as you mentioned, international exchange is like the DNA also of university research. And at the same time, we are in the situation that we want to think about climate protection and sustainability while having those or facilitating those international exchange. So thank you for that, and also for showing us the huge resources that you compiled together with the MSCA Green Charter. And I totally agree, it's helpful not just for people who are managing such a program, but in general, it's good to have a look at this. So allow me to start with the first question while everyone else still has the chance to pop in their questions in the chat. And Katinka and I, we were thinking about that would interest us. So what was the initial motivation behind establishing the MSCA Green Charter? So has there been a trigger to start this project?
Well, yes. Yeah. So I've joined the team 2 years ago in 2020, and there had been, let's say, we had done some brainstorming initially. So my head of unit had always been pushing, let's say, to try and think more green because it is, an emerging priority. And then I think with the publication or the announcement of the Green Deal by the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, I think that kind of gave us also the let's say the approval from higher up to do something more concrete. And there were a number of ideas launched, including green eligibility criteria or such a green charter, because I mean the one of the things that the EU does well is to support actions or to provide a forum for exchange of best practices and sharing knowledge. So I think that the Green Charter goes a little bit into that direction. So it's not a top-down thing that we impose, but it's more something to encourage people to think and act on their own. Yeah, so I wouldn't, I say the Green Deal would be the trigger for the Green Charter, but environmental considerations have been a recurring topic, I think, over the years.
Thank you for that, Marléne. And I'll start by taking a few questions from the chat. So Kerkir, he wonders if you already have some feedback on how the participants followed the guidelines so far. And I know this is really early, but I guess you have at least received some applications. So do you have kind of any first ideas as to if the soft tool kind of works in
yes. So it's a very valid question, and it's something that we're trying to look at as well. As you said, it's still so the Green Charter has been published under Horizon Europe, which started last year, let's say, and we still, I mean, we have staff exchanges, I think the call where it will make a big impact, which is still ongoing. So actually we haven't yet, the deadline is on, I think, the 9th of March. So the first call is still open. So it's a bit early to say, what applicants will put in their applications or not. Co-fund just closed recently, and for the others, we still haven't published or announced the results. So unfortunately, it's still a bit early to say specifically under Horizon Europe what the impact will be, but we have done a survey of previous projects, MSCA still ongoing or past projects funded under Horizon 2020, so the predecessor of Horizon Europe, where we've tried to find out if they are already implementing something along the lines of the Green Charter, and we have received quite some positive feedback, and it's actually also based on this feedback that we will compile the examples of successful MSCA Green stories. So not based on Horizon Europe projects, because we don't have those yet. But monitoring, actually constant monitoring, that's a little bit one of the challenges. I think that's also why the French presidency wants to talk about the charter and maybe come up with some recommendations, because actually the reporting will happen at final report stage. So there will be a box online where they have to type in what they have done or not done, but that's in 4 years' time. So it's at the end of the project. So, what happens between is a little bit obscure even for us. What we can do is, and we have tools for this, is to launch surveys, periodic surveys, just to keep track a little bit what's happening. And this we do, and we will continue doing, obviously.
Thank you. And then coming back to your point about what maybe the next step and how to move on, it has been quite a huge discussion also in the expert group about avoiding any kind of measures that would kind of favorize some kind of scientific topics over other topics. So that's of course challenging if you move towards harder tools. But in the MSCA, you have this European Charter for Researchers and Code of Conduct for Recruitment of Researchers. So I thought, and that was also a discussion at the University of Oslo, that it's also a soft tool, but it's still a bit more formalized and organized. So I don't know if you've talked about that.
No, we haven't. So I'm taking your point because it's true. It's a good suggestion to link this more, but because yes, as you said, I mean, making it a hard eligibility criteria is tricky, because especially for staff exchange projects where actually we encourage third country participation, it would be unfortunate to penalize projects that involve partners really from all parts of the globe. But then obviously everything has to be, the evaluators would also be briefed in a certain way that they don't penalize, that they understand the actions and the principles behind, and so that this would not be a penalizing factor. But yes, no, I completely agree that we have to be very careful there, and that's why at this stage we haven't introduced any hard measures yet, even though they might probably be more effective, let's say, than just a voluntary adherence to a charter.
Thank you. I have no further questions in the chat. Do you want to pose another question, Katrin or Marit, before we move on? And then everybody are also free to pose questions to Marléne after I and Marit have given our presentation. So please just feel free to continue posing questions in the chat.
Okay, I think we can take that up again at the end in our overall discussion, if that's okay with you, Marléne. And then I would say, Katinka, you take the floor.
Okay. I'm going to give a few reflections about how it was to participate in the expert group on the greening of the MSCA. I'm Katinka, I'm a senior advisor, and I've been a senior advisor within sustainability, energy and climate since 2010 at the University of Oslo. And now I am at UIO Energy, which is one of the 3 strategic cross-disciplinary priority areas at the University of Oslo, and we're anchored directly under the Directorate. I'm just going to kind of try to give a little bit of an overview of how we perceive the process. And most of all, it was interesting to learn. And also, as Marléne introduced you today, during the whole process, the Commission kind of anchored this strategy of the Green Charter to EU policies in general, and of course, in particular to the Green Deal, which was really actual at the time. And also to learn about the relationship between the different funding schemes and the policies that were developed. And also a bit more about how the processes were in the development of policy schemes and calls. Because we are often involved in consultory level and on calls and actions and bring in our kind of the views through the national contact points. But here we were involved kind of in the middle of the process where the Commission had a goal, but we were still able to kind of learn about the process and contribute in the outlining before it went through the comitology and an adoption part. And of course, as an individual, is always the primary motivation is to engage in discussions and learn from others and to contribute. And of course, we engaged with the European Commission and in particular with the DG for EAC. But through the discussions, we also engaged a lot with the other stakeholders within the expert group. And that was really good for me. Also in relationship to the stage that we were at the University of Oslo, where we were in the midst of a process of developing our own comprehensive climate and environmental strategy. And then, of course, we took the opportunity to also discuss these issues within the UNICA Green and SDGs group. And also on a personal level, I talked and discussed more on a high level the principle and format and goals of the charter with the national contact points at the Research Council of Norway, who then could represent kind of the entire sector at nationally, but also, as I said, internally at the University of Oslo. And at the University of Oslo, we managed to have small talks across all kinds of organizational levels. We talked with the university leader and central administration, but also with mainly research support staff at the faculty level, and then again down to the concrete MSCA support staff who work at the departments and centers where the researchers and applicants actually send in the applications. And it was a good arena to talk about these issues across the different levels that are involved on our side. And also across different managerial areas. Because as you said, Marléne, this doesn't really only relate to travel. It relates, of course, to research policy and strategy at the top level, but also to operational parts in the HR department and in procurement for sustainable procurement policies and actions, and on the finance part, and also on the estate and campus management part. So it was kind of a good opportunity to engage across also different management areas at the university. And it was a very open process guided by Marléne and her colleagues, where we could both discuss the format of the Green Charter and the framework around it, but also kind of the output expectations and even details in the end in what was formulated. And I felt really that we could also influence it. And that was a good feeling when you participate in an expert group. And also, I think it was good for us at the University of Oslo, because it could also influence the way that we had a very inclusive and process when developing our own comprehensive climate and environmental strategy, which was adopted by our university board now in February. And I'm happy to say that this kind of goal and approach that is seen in the MSCA Green Charter is also a common approach that we have in our comprehensive climate strategy, where we really are on the what you call a soft tool, but still it's really an encouragement to adhere on a voluntary note, but still it's a quite strong indication and also support tools in order to reach that goal. And I think that this is just printed from the Green Charter, and I think it's good to see that we are on an encouraging and sustainable thinking note, and that we promote the sustainable activities and conduct, and also combine it with providing these examples of good practice. And that, I think that's really good, and a lot of the participants in the expert group sent in examples that then were published by the Commission on their web pages. And on the final note, I just like to show you this sentence that is a part of the introduction to the Green Charter, where it states that the Green Charter does not compromise the bottom-up nature of the MSCA, and where the topics are freely chosen by applicants, and the main drivers are scientific excellence and innovation. And it was a very important notion for the university participants of the expert group all the way along. And this sentence was a sentence that we suggested to the Commission quite late in the process, but it's really nice to see that even on a detailed level, they pick up on our inputs, and that we're able to kind of actually impact the ending result. So it was a very good experience for me, and it was also useful on a larger sense than just being part of the group. So thank you for the possibility. I'm gonna end my presentation here. And the next speaker who's gonna talk is Marit Eldholm. She's a senior advisor at the Faculty of Social Sciences, and also works at the Arena Center of European Studies, which lies under the Faculty of Social Sciences. And she does a lot of pre-grant support work on the MSCA actions, but also on the thematic group of the Horizon Europe that you introduced in your overview chart, Marléne. So she will talk a little bit about her experience from the application stage here, but also from running these kind of projects in general. So I will stop, and then Marit can share her presentation. And to all of you, you are just free to post questions to Katrin, to me, to Marléne, and also to Marit in the chat, and we will pick up after Marit's talk. Thank you.
So thank you, Katinka. As you said, I'm a senior advisor at the University of Oslo. I'm in a shared position between the Arena Center for European Studies and the Social Sciences faculty. And I provided support for externally funded projects and run projects, successful projects, but with a particular focus on the MSCA part and also on collaborative projects in the EU's framework programs. So first, thank you for the invitation to share some experiences from developing a proposal for an MSCA doctoral network and how we address the Green Charter as part of that. I also feel the need to underline that I've not worked with greening strategies or sustainability questions myself, but this is, of course, increasingly on the agenda, not least at my university. So for me, this webinar is also an opportunity to learn more about these questions and strategies. And I'm currently not managing a doctoral network, but hopefully we'll just in between, because I was the administrative project manager of a PhD network funded by the EU's MSCA actions in the Horizon 2020 program. That was a large ITN that ran from 2017 until the end of 2020. And then Arena Centre for European Studies applied as a coordinator again for a new doctoral network in the latest call last November. So today I wanted to share with you some of these experiences from the proposal stage and specifically how we responded to the requirements of the Green Charter, together with a previous experience with coordinating such an international multi-partner doctoral network and considering green aspects, in particular related to reducing travels as part of this. So after giving you a few more details on the successful previous doctoral network and our new proposal, I will share some thoughts on the trade-offs to be considered when designing such a multi-partner international cross-sectoral network for a team PhD that takes into account sustainability standards as well. So the University of Oslo recently coordinated the ITN Plato, where I was the administrative project manager. This project brought together 15 doctoral researchers and 20 partner institutions across Europe. The 15 PhDs were enrolled in doctoral programs of 9 different universities in 9 different European countries. And I want to add just that we were really lucky that we were able to complete all the training activities just a week before the pandemic broke out and closed all the borders. So it only impacted us in the sense that a few PhDs had to disrupt their ongoing secondments and go back to their home or host country and complete the stays remotely, but this only applied to 3 people of the 15. So the Plato project basically received great reviews from the evaluators afterwards as well, so we have a lot of experience to build on. Last year then we developed a new proposal as a coordinator with a new Horizon Europe call. And for the first time, we encountered this MSCA Green Charter. The new project that we hope to realize is Agora. And for this project, we've set up a consortium of 13 partners, but only 4 beneficiaries or universities. And they will recruit 10 doctoral candidates. And the universities are Oslo, it's also Freie Universität Berlin, the University of Vienna, and Scuola Normale Superiore in Florence. And the topic of this project would be Europe's democratic resilience in the post-truth age, and it gathers scholars from the social sciences, and in particular communication studies, political science and theory, sociology and law. And we included 9 associated partners from the same 4 countries as our beneficiaries, from sectors such as news media, journalism, regulatory bodies, local authorities. We have NGOs and foundations as part of the consortium. In addition to these 4 countries, we have 1 UK partner, Vitae, which is the world's leading association for career development of researchers. And we're excited to learn the results. They will come next month. So of course, we don't know if this project will be funded, but I can still share you some experience and ideas that we considered when developing the proposal. So as Marléne has already introduced you to the Green Charter, these are some issues that we had to address that we selected to address in the proposal. Some are more relevant for our project than others of those measures in the charter. Mainly, we discussed how to minimize environmental impact of research activities, the green purchasing aspects, hybrid conferencing, low carbon forms of transportation, carbon offsetting, and greater awareness on environmental sustainability. These are the main measures from the charter that we felt were relevant for our proposal. Of less relevance for this type of research project is the production of waste and harmful substances, use of energy, water, and scarce resources, and also travels across continents that we have European partners. But my main input today will be on this, I think, and the trade-offs between online and on-site events and other activities. And in case not all are familiar with these MSCA actions, I just wanted to say explicitly a bit more about some of the core features of such a doctoral network. And the first point is that its success really depends on the 15 researchers, or in this case, 10 researchers, to be recruited. So you don't know when designing the project who will actually do the research. So you will have to develop a research and training program for a set of unknown junior scholars. And you also won't know their backgrounds in more detail, their backgrounds, experiences, and skills. In addition, this is a scheme where mobility, international and cross-sectoral, is at the core. So travels across borders is a key requirement, basically, in order to build a multi-partner and cross-sectoral and international collaborative project. So with this in mind, I identified at least here 5 areas that we need to carefully consider, or where we have to consider some trade-offs between meeting physically and digital alternatives. So on recruitment, we can of course encourage online interviews to reduce the carbon footprint of traveling. If we have 3 candidates for each of the 10 positions to be interviewed, there are potential 30 travels for a 1-hour interview. So this is a clear example of online replacing on-site, and that would have an impact on the carbon footprint. However, we must also remember that this scheme within this scheme, we are by definition recruiting researchers internationally. There is an explicit mobility requirement that candidates cannot have lived in the country of recruitment for more than a maximum 1 year in the last 3 years. And some candidates may never have set foot in the potential new country of work. For the Plato project that we run, this applied to 2 of the 15 candidates or recruited PhDs. So an on-site interview would be an opportunity for such candidates to explore a bit more of the new country or city, and in turn to make a more informed decision on whether or not they would thrive in a new position. And on the part of the recruits, of course, it can be difficult to test the suitability of candidates for the position and for the team, only based on online interviews. So on this point, I think that encouraging online interviews is appropriate, but yet there needs to be some flexibility, considering in particular if the candidate has been to the country before. Team building is a second crucial element to consider. We're recruiting PhD candidates for an intensive doctoral program. They will have more compulsory activities and a more demanding program than their colleagues at their local PhD programs. It will be more prestigious and give more opportunities as well. But the value of and importance of building a team is really of the essence, I think, for a doctoral network to be successful. So by having a special focus on physical meetings and ensure enough time for team building, with icebreakers, informal encounters and social activities at the beginning in particular, you can build trust, personal relations, and so on that are crucial for the doctoral candidates to support each other, to be motivated and to build resilience and also build relations with the broader consortium, their supervisors and other peers. And then if you do this well in the beginning, you can then move on to more online meetings afterwards. In terms of training, physical education and meetings are essential. They're more engaging, they allow for more active discussions with better learning outcomes. But universities have learned a lot during the pandemic and are much better equipped today than only 2 years ago, I think. So in terms of what formats are suitable for what types of learning, what you want to achieve. So we can absolutely take advantage of this knowledge and experience to strike a good balance between online and on-site trainings. Networking is another central aspect of such doctoral networks. It's a key success factor. So bringing together supervisors and experts across sectors and countries from different disciplines, institutions, backgrounds is indeed one of the assets and selling points of such a project. So also here, we must make sure to strike a balance between physical and digital meeting places. And we should not underestimate the value of informal encounters during breaks, meals, social activities, and so on, that may open doors for young researchers and broaden their professional networks. And finally, as regards project management, my experience is also that physical meetings are important from the perspective of building a support structure by the coordinator. We're building trust and creating meeting places and safe spaces for the difficult conversations with doctoral researchers. That's also very important. So project manager and the coordinator should meet PhDs in person and be available for them. Actually, I would say it's a crucial part of risk management, because the so-called risks then in such projects are related to dropouts, sick leaves, difficult supervision relationships, mental health issues, and so on. So if you build these relations at the start as well, at physical meetings, then you can, I think, to a greater extent, take a supportive role from a distance in the next step. But it's certainly something to also be mindful of. So with this in mind, I'd like to briefly mention how we dealt with some of these questions in the proposal. For one, as I mentioned earlier, we have a limited number of partners, only 5 countries, and activities will happen mainly in these 4 countries on the map. So the teams are rather concentrated, which also implies less travels for project events. An aspect of doctoral networks is also to allow for the researchers to gain work experience, build networks and knowledge of non-academic sectors. And we decided to offer so-called secondments in the same country as they are recruited. This was, to be honest, not first and foremost a sustainability issue, but it was based on experience as well, because the secondments abroad they're surely very rewarding. They're also resource demanding in terms of the time it requires to organize a stay abroad, and also the extra burden for candidates with children moving abroad for a month or 2. So let me underline again that the proposal is not funded yet, so let's hope. But the existence of the Green Charter encouraged us to consider some aspects explicitly in the proposal, and most notably how we combine online and on-site events to design the training program, and also to keep a sustainability focus at events. So if it is funded, we would take the guiding principles of the Charter one step further and develop more detailed guidelines for the projects, as well as for partner institutions and for individual researchers. So, but I also wanted to show you a bit from our proposal and how we thought about implementing the Charter in more detail. Well, if it's funded, it will be an opportunity then to go more in detail and learn more about these issues and devise good strategies. So in line with the Charter, the project should do on-site what is necessary to do in person, and online what can be done there, and avoid unnecessary travels. So after lockdowns, it's obvious by now that many smaller meetings can be held online, and we do not have to find space and time for all of this during a very busy week of a PhD school, as we did in Plato. So, for instance, boards and supervision teams that can meet regularly online. And we can also take, obviously, advantage of the skills and technical tools that we are the universities during the pandemic to organize good online trainings. As part of Agora, we have suggested to set up an online lecture series where we would invite like partners from other sectors, but also external experts to share their expertise instead of holding single keynotes during a PhD school, or in addition to possibly. But by having like an online lecture series, we can include more perspectives and have a more regularity of webinars at a much lower cost. So this is, here I think the pandemic has opened a lot of opportunities for more networking and collaboration. It has also been an opportunity to explore various forms of online social activities, creating informal spaces that can be particularly rewarding, I think, for an established team then to follow up. As for on-site events, as I mentioned, I think the team building activities are crucial in the start, especially. We have set up 4 PhD schools, so 1 in each partner country, for dedicated to more in-depth training and discussion, but with follow-up activities, online activities and workshops afterwards. As part of the PhD schools, we explicitly aim to engage the local associated partners when there, so they don't have to travel a lot across countries as well. And we would issue guidelines for PhD schools on the sustainability in the practical organization of events as regards food, venue, local travel, social events, and so on, as was already mentioned by my colleagues earlier. As for designing, setting up a sustainable travel policy, this is very much something to be done in the next step. So this is an opportunity for me to learn more with so many experts in the room. So I think at the implementation stage, a doctoral network or the consortium would have to agree really on these project guidelines for sustainable travels. And first, of course, we would look for best practice and guidelines, as Marléne has also highlighted today, starting with these resources available through the guidance material to the MSCA Green Charter. But such a guideline could, of course, focus on selecting low carbon forms of transportation. But it's important for a consortium then to agree and discuss joint principles. But I think really that the lump sum grant of a doctoral network, which is different from the other types of funding schemes of the Horizon Europe, means that there is a possibility to spend more on travels for sustainable travels than some other EU funding schemes. Oh, sorry for that. Bump back in. There are, of course, some challenges to yeah, well, first this at the individual level, sorry, we can ask researchers to consider if a meeting event can take place digitally. This would apply for a doctoral network, mainly for data collection, interviews, for instance, or attending conferences. But among the challenges to be considered is that is, of course, then the reality of low carbon alternatives in Europe today. It could cost 3 to 4 times probably the price of a flight ticket if you take the train from, let's say, Oslo to Florence. So this is not really facilitated by the current train infrastructure and services across Europe today. So we'll have to see how more about the feasibility here. We will have to discuss, you know, how to yeah, make a cost-benefit analysis basically. Also, I feel we need to understand better what the most suitable and low carbon forms of transportation actually are, just so of clear guidelines on that point to us running such projects. And I'm also thinking in particular perhaps of the risk of greenwashing in terms of what measures are regarded as sustainable. I mean, for instance, the climate quotas you can buy when purchasing a flight ticket. It's perhaps not the way to solve this, but I presume this will have to be seen also with in light of the general EU climate quota system and how that develops in the coming years, and what is the best, what are the best alternatives. So here there's, I think, an information need among us as users or as who would implement and set up such strategies for collaborative projects. Who decides? By that, I'm also thinking about the PhD researchers as a particular a group in a way. I mean, they are they have a lot of pressure and demands to complete a PhD in 3 years within this scheme. So it's also important to consider or to support them in knowing how to make a good decision and allow them to make a decision on from their own side whether travel is necessary or not, so that you won't risk a supervisor or a local line manager saying that they are not allowed to spend this or that amount of money for travels. So striking a balance there is also important to do jointly within the consortium. But to wrap up, I just wanted to finish on a positive note. I think really the Charter could matter in a lot of ways, not least because the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, they foster, it's designed to foster the future research leaders. So we have sort of researchers in the formative years. So it's an opportunity to really build awareness on these issues for the next generation of scholars and also leaders outside academic sectors. We have the component of cooperation across sectors. So we have a lot of other sectors involved in these programs, means that you can have a sharing of experiences and raising awareness also beyond the higher education and university sector. So as such, I think a doctoral network could lead by example, and especially perhaps if institutions such as the University of Oslo and the University of Berlin with developed policies and who's working on these issues to a great extent are involved. So I would just conclude by saying that I am sure this is a very welcome soft tool that shifts the focus on international mobility also towards considering other opportunities and the sustainability then of mobility in a collaborative project. Thank you.
Thank you, Marit. That was really nice with the perspective on both how to adopt and respond to these kind of charters in the application phase, but not the least on all the kind of dilemmas and things that we have to think through while running the projects and actually doing actions. I think it was really interesting that you said you were considering then doing an online lecture series, because that's really an experience we have throughout this COVID period, that it has proven as a very good tool to keep up contact between the physical meetings, and not the least to engage more with especially the kind of associated partners from governmental bodies and industry, that they log on and participate more actively in these kind of low target online series of lectures. You said that you would start and look at the best practice kind of tools that the Commission have provided, but do you have also some kind of other kind of wish list from the funding bodies or others, and on what kind of tools that you would appreciate to have at hand? For example, a guideline on tools and how to calculate what is actually the most carbon efficient travel modes, for example, from important cities in Europe or something like that? Or are there other kind of the toolboxes or guidelines that you would really like to have at your hand when you're then going from application to implementation?
Yeah, I'm sure there is, and it's a bit early for me to say too much about that right now, since I've not digged into this in depth. So I'm sure if funded, I will be happy to come back to you with even more on that. But at the moment, I'm thinking what strikes me as sort of the most tricky for my part is to really understand where is the balance between or to what extent should you encourage or go for like the higher cost cumbersome train rides versus flights, for instance, if basically because the train so this is not the part of this webinar or beyond our control, of course, but having a better train infrastructure across borders in Europe surely would help. But from our perspective, I think basically a toolkit that would, or just pointers to where we would understand what type of carbon offsetting, for instance, is good or not in a way.
Thanks.
If I might,
there are no new questions in the chat, but I would like to have some comments from you too, Marléne.
No, just because it's true. I'm no expert on trains or transport networks in Europe, but I know it is one of the priorities under the current commissions. I mean, also previous ones, but basically to develop trans-European networks, and this is why we have the so-called Connecting Europe facility, for instance, which is a big funding program of 21 billion euros, CEF, that's the acronym, and which is really targeting infrastructure in Europe to facilitate interconnection in the fields of transport, energy, and digital services, actually. So this is ongoing. It's also a 7-year program, obviously. So hopefully we will see, the impact of this kind of, funding programs also on facilitating transport, and actually also our cohesion funds, which are also, one of the big main funding instruments that we have. It's 48 billion euros for 7 years, focusing on specific countries, mostly widening countries or countries that have, a GNI of below 90%, so Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Estonia, etc. So there we also have the cohesion funds, which, are targeting to reduce imbalances between countries and member states, also focusing on transport infrastructure, for instance. So hopefully, with all these funds injected, we will see some improvement in the way we travel between countries, which I agree, it's still difficult to strike the right balance between what is sustainable and what is actually cost efficient.
Thank you. I see there's a question for me. If we included the international travel as part of our environmental and climate strategy at the University of Oslo, and yes, we did. For now, it's only the strategy that is adopted, and during the spring and the autumn, we will adopt the first kind of tasks, and the goals are set in percentage, but there are no kind of adopted clear practical tasks yet. But the travel is, of course, on the agenda there, and it will be sent out in a hearing later on Friday, actually, to the university, the first kind of tasks that we want to adopt. But on the international travel, it's really important to have this included, because in Norway, we have most of our energy production that is produced from hydro, so it's very sustainable. So travel and transport accounts for 50% of our carbon emissions. And in particular, this holds for the overseas flights. That accounts for a huge part of this portion. So for us, it's really If the travel was not included, it wouldn't have been a comprehensive climate and environmental strategy. In my presentation, you can see a link to the strategy, but I will also post a link in the chat for those who are interested.
Thank you, Katinka. There's another comment in the chat from.
Yeah, that's from my boss, and it also goes back to the answer Kirki's question.
Exactly. Yeah. And below that, there's something from Tanja van Loon from VOB in Brussels, and she comments that the externalization of negative impact is a significant risk with ecological footprint monitoring and reduction. So like this relates to the earlier question on offsetting and the comment on greenwashing by you, Marit. And some standard methods might be helpful to evaluate the actual impact. So I'm not sure, is there any framework maybe also planned on the EU level that you would like to cite in your funding regulations, Marléne? Or
yeah, I agree that greenwashing or offsetting is problematic, and especially offsetting. I think we had a big discussion in the expert group. I remember that it should be kind of a last resort measure. So you should try to avoid as much as possible emitting emissions before thinking of offsetting. We, as far as I know so far, we don't have at Commission level a sort of recommendation or strategy on offsetting, unless it has been developed recently. At least when we developed the charter, there wasn't, specifically because there is no broad agreement on how this should be achieved, so you have to be careful. I agree, but then in the guidance material there are a series of tools that have been developed at Commission level, also kind of what we call the, for example, the Eco Management and Audit Scheme, EMAS, or you have the International Standard for Environmental Management, so ISO, the whole ISO family. There's a Consumer Footprint Calculator. So there are actually already tools, especially EMAS or ISO, that actually should help you in making choices, because if they're listed under these tools, it means that they actually are sustainable or making efforts. So I think that's already a safe bet. As I said, even like for hotels, etc., there is an eco label for tourist accommodations. So there are already, but if you have more, I mean, it could be that there's a lot more out there that I'm just not aware of. As I said, I'm not really an environmental expert. We do have different directorates general, so I work in the Marie Curie unit, but we do have a DG for environment, for climate, for energy, for transport, and they are all working on the Green Deal, and there are lots of new initiatives coming out, so that I'm sure there is even more nowadays than even just a year before. But I agree, it can be a bit challenging to find the information amongst all of this. So that's why we have the guidance material, and if you have more, that's why we're always grateful to receive additional input and to update these kind of documents.
Yes, thank you. And I also think that the resource book that you provide is really a good starting point. And what our discussion also illustrates nicely, I think, and also the range of participants we had in the webinar today, is that the MSCA Green Charter really encourages applicants who are mostly based in the research departments to think about sustainability issues, but there are also a lot of initiatives already in place at the specific universities. And so everything that you just mentioned, that was why I was nodding so hard, is like, for example, EMAS is a huge point at our university. So we have the certification there. So for everyone here in this webinar, I can also encourage you to reach out to your sustainability offices, so as your sustainability managers at your universities, and maybe also connect those efforts that you are having when it comes to funding proposals with the guidelines that are already in place, or at least with the expertise that is already there at your university, because sometimes, you know, there are already resources available. So with that being said, we're 2 minutes over time slightly, and I would like to thank all our speakers on behalf of the working group of UNICA Green and SDGs for joining us today for this discussion and for sharing your expertise and also your presentations. You have seen in the chat, they will be available online later on, and if you have any questions, you also find our contact details in them and can just reach out individually. So thank you again for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.
Many thanks. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.